Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming. It's 10:30. We will kick off so that we can keep to time. We have 5 presentations in this session. You are in concurrent session 4, room A, the educational assessment and evaluation stream. So if this is not the stream that you're after, please flick out into one of the other rooms because this is the stream. This particular stream is, I'll just quickly run through what it is. It includes authenticity and assessment, assessment that incorporates academic integrity such as reducing plagiarism or contract cheating, social innovation in assessment design, embedding clinical practice or work integrated learning into assessment, innovative techniques to ensure student success, quality of content and curriculum design, digital badging and micro credentials, and or attrition and retention. So quite a varied collection of concepts to get through.
Sorry,
Welcome. Yes, I can hear someone.
Sorry, this is Chris Smolder. I didn't hear mine, and I thought I was presenting in this one. It's on.
Yes, I haven't. Yes, I haven't started. That's just the theme. I haven't started talking about the presentations yet. So hang on, Chris. We'll get to it. I'm pretty sure yours will come up. There are 5 presentations: choosing inclusion, meaningful assessment and evaluation, how to make individual and traditional assessments more effective to combat contract cheating, Sim-MAPP, and peer-to-peer. So they're the 5 presentations that will come up. The presentation is being recorded. And as I said earlier, the recording will be accessed via a YouTube channel after the conference is completed. And if you miss a session and you want to see something that's in another room, don't worry. You will have, if you've registered, you will have access to the YouTube channel. We'll have 10-15 minutes per presentation. Because we've got 5, I will keep everyone very strictly to time. You'll get a hoy from me at 10 minutes. Then I'll give you another hoy at 12 minutes, another hoy at 14, and then at 15, I will ask you, please stop speaking. And then we'll go to a few questions, see how we go with questions, but then transition quite quickly into the next speaker. And at the end of the time slot, if we've got time, we'll come back and revisit any questions that perhaps we didn't get to in the first run through. So that, without further ado, I would like to now hand over to you, Christina, the first presentation, choosing inclusion, why we need to provide a variety and choice in assessment. And I will hand over to you if you'd like to share your screen and kick off.
The title of our presentation, as Celeste said, choosing inclusion, why we need to provide variety and choice in assessment. This comes from a research project, a scholarship of learning and teaching project, and investigation into the educational and support needs of students with characteristics of dyslexia. And it was by myself, Dr. Susan Hunt, Shane Parker, and Karin Stokes. The research was in 3 parts. There was a self-report survey designed to recruit students for interviews. Student interviews, so we chose 12 students from the survey in order to interview. We tried to choose students with a variety of characteristics, and we especially wanted to find students with and without an assessment or diagnosis, if you will, for dyslexia. And we had a staff focus group comprised of CQUniversity staff, both support staff and lecturers. And to start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about dyslexia. Dyslexia affects accurate or fluent word recognition, decoding of words, and spelling ability. These aren't the only characteristics of dyslexia, but they're the defining characteristics of dyslexia that set it apart from other neurological differences. Dyslexia is not related to overall intelligence or access to a reasonable education. It affects around 5 to 15% of the population, which is actually quite similar in number to the number of people in the world with blue eyes or who are left-handed. If you think back to primary school, the kids that had trouble in school, potentially a number of them were affected by dyslexia. People with dyslexia can and do learn how to read However, it's been found that university students with dyslexia do have difficulty with certain skills related to learning. And this comes from a survey in the UK from university students from a number of universities. And you can see that students with dyslexia reported having more difficulty with things like organizing essays and expressing ideas in writing than students without dyslexia. When it comes to expressing ideas orally, you can see the difference is much smaller. And just very briefly, in case you don't know, in order to be eligible for reasonable accommodations at a university in Australia, a student with dyslexia has to provide evidence in the form of a medical document saying what their difficulties are. And this document allows them to apply for reasonable accommodations. With dyslexia, typically this includes extensions on written assignments, additional time on exams, and occasionally also access to assistive technology, such as dictation software or text reading software. It is not very common to be offered alternative assessments, and in my experience, I have not seen a student yet be offered an alternative assessment. So I'm going to talk about the problem with this kind of approach. In our study, many of the students had a negative history of schooling history. So you can see here that they felt very strongly of failure and also low expectations from educators. There's little awareness of dyslexia in schools up until recently. This affects students in a number of ways. Firstly, it really impacts their belief in their ability to succeed and perhaps even be able to persist in university study. It also affects their willingness to seek help. And going back to our survey was designed to identify students with characteristics of dyslexia. It was a validated survey from another study. And 67 students who took our survey scored above the threshold for potentially having, well, for having characteristics of dyslexia. Certainly they were experiencing significant difficulties in their studies. Of these 67 students, 2/3 of them did not have an assessment that would allow them to be able to apply for accommodations. So 2/3 of them presumably were not receiving support for dyslexia. Another study, which has sort of similar findings, was also carried out in Australia. So Grimes and colleagues found that of 994 students who did have an assessment, 633 had not disclosed to the university. So those students probably weren't receiving special accommodations either. So 2/3 of students that did have an assessment were not disclosing. So you can see we have a problem where there are probably a number of students affected by dyslexia and possibly other neurological differences that are not receiving any special support. Okay, so in our study, we asked the students, how much do you study? And a significant theme to come up was the amount of time and effort that the students had to invest in their studies. So this was a graduate student and he only had 2 units and he was studying 12 hours a day. This full-time student said that she was studying 70 or more hours per week, which is almost twice as much as meant. We also found that students had a lot of writing and that it really dominated their study at university. So this student was a first-year student and she had 5 essays in a single term. This was for a health science subject. So that same graduate student, when he was able to present orally, was able to get 100% on one of his assessments. So imagine the boost to his confidence that that would have given him. But more importantly, the amount of time that the students are having to spend in producing these assessments is actually preventing them from learning, from engaging with other content in their units, which is defeating the purpose. So what I'm not suggesting that essays don't have their place and that timed exams don't have their place. What I am saying is it would be lovely if we could give students the opportunity to demonstrate their learning in other ways. In an extensive study on inclusive assessment in England, students were asked to select from 44 different possible assessment types, their preferred types of assessment. And interestingly, students without dyslexia and students with dyslexia both selected continuous assessment and coursework with discussion as their top two choices. Both of these forms of assessment do offer opportunities for formative feedback, which has been shown to promote learning. And also, it's interesting because I saw one of the presentations yesterday on contract cheating, and a lot of these assessment types also lend themselves to avoiding issues with contract cheating. Not surprisingly, students with dyslexia did not choose essay assignments in their top 7. There are other problems with over-reliance on a single type of assessment. Number one, they're not always authentic. And this wouldn't necessarily be an issue if we weren't overusing them. So it's hard to justify sometimes why we overuse them. They don't encourage learning of other important skills. So presentation skills like we're doing today. Also working in groups, project work, things like that they may have to do in the future. They're not always the most effective way to encourage learning, as I discussed earlier. Also exams, students cram for. Studies have shown that long-term retention of things are not, well, it does not encourage long-term retention. And they're not always valid in terms of the amount of effort that students have to put into skills that aren't possibly core skills of the unit. There are two kinds of inclusion. The first is keeping practices as they are and always have been, and support students who do not learn that way through special supports and accommodations. And to go back to what I said earlier, we don't always even know who these students are, and we can't. We're not supporting them necessarily with accommodations, and when we do, you know, you could argue that it still isn't fair. Or we could strive to design a curriculum that anticipates the needs of its students with an aim to helping them learn. If this is a part of our student body, then we should try to teach them in a way that is going to help them learn. And it's very well known that assessment is key to what students will learn and how they will engage with their unit.
That's 10 minutes, Christina.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to give you an example of, I've been talking mainly about variety in assessment. I'm just going to give you an example of, a successful example of providing students with choice. So in that same study that I referred to earlier in England, they took an engineering course, and I think traditionally they had been given timed written exams. Instead, they offered students a choice. They could either do module tests, coursework, portfolio, or weekly summative tests. And the students had a certain period of time in which they could change their mind. There were concerns about equity, as there would be anywhere. Professional bodies were consulted, and course, you know, the equivalent of course coordinators. All these issues were resolved. And these were the findings. Additional resources were in fact needed to develop and mark assessments. However, no special accommodations were requested. There was a significant reduction in the number of lowest grades, a significant increase in the number of grades above 60%. And surveys indicated that not only students were happy with this, but so were the lecturers. And some of them initially had been skeptical. So I just want to leave you with one thought, that excellence and equity are not mutually exclusive. Providing choice and variety in assessment doesn't have to represent a lowering of standards. We just need to make thoughtful and, I feel, deliberate choices about how we assess students and not just use what we've always used, so that all students have the best chance to learn and to succeed. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you very much, Christina. That was fantastic. I will open it to questions and comments, but that really resonated with me. I didn't realize that dyslexia was so common. I guess, you know, the analogy that you made between blue-eyed students and dyslexia, that was really good. That helped me get a volume in my head of how often it occurs. I did notice, I'll open questions if people want to ask, but I did notice that the table you showed of the students who had dyslexia and who didn't have dyslexia and the assessment types that they chose, the people with dyslexia did not choose peer and self-evaluation, and that actually surprised me. Why do you think that was?
Well, because I imagine the stigma. It wouldn't be surprising to me. A lot of people with dyslexia, whether they realize initially that they have dyslexia or not, are very embarrassed and very protective of their written work. They don't want other people to see. It is a very big issue.
So I guess there's a almost like a responsibility from us as a teaching scholar. So I use a lot of self and peer assessment, and that's why I was drawn to that. But perhaps there's a responsibility for us as a teaching scholar to ensure that the self and peer assessment is not necessarily about written work, but about some other form of assessment.
It could be that we still, you know, I mean, we can't exclude written work altogether, but we just need to be sensitive about it. And I think, you know, try to provide other opportunities as well.
And I think you also made the other good point about authenticity in assessment. So regardless of what it is, if it's authentic, it's going to be realistic for the student when they graduate, and therefore part of the learning itself. Regardless
right.
if you've got dyslexia or not, it's irrelevant. So, you know, if the assessment is authentic.
That's right. So if it's something they're going to need in their target profession, there's no getting around it. They're going to have to do it anyway. But if we're giving them an assessment that they're not going to be using in their target profession, we have to ask ourselves why, and is there a better way?
So does anyone have any questions for Christina?
Yeah, I got one.
Thank you, Samer.
So what if the SPA is completely anonymous? Would that make any difference to students with dyslexia?
If what was completely anonymous, peer assessment?
Yeah. Because
yeah, that would be one way to approach it. I think if you wanted to do peer assessment and you thought people might be concerned about that, that's a possibility.
Yeah, okay.
It really is, that stigma issue really is a very big issue. So even students that I work with, and we've acknowledged, and we know that they have dyslexia, they're still embarrassed, they're still apologetic. They still talk to me frequently about things that happened in class where they were really embarrassed. It's a really big deal. I mean, if you think about it, they've gone through 12 years of schooling, and every day in every subject having to publicly appear to be not very smart. And the things that people have said to them, that almost every student reported having been said to them, would break your heart.
Okay, so thank you. We'll keep moving. If people have got any questions, please do type it into the chat or raise your hand, and we may have time to revisit again at the end of the presentations, Christina. So can I just ask everyone to show their appreciation to Christina? Okay, we'll move on to the next presentation, Meaningful Assessments and Evaluation with Lasting Value and Systems Perspectives. Chadana, are you online?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I can see you now.
Okay, so I'm Chandana Watagodakumbura. I'm from Melbourne campus of CQU. I'm working there as a sessional and visiting academic, and I'm presenting this based on a number of publications I have done, and most notably, I mean, I've done 3 books in the past 5-6 years, and the last one was published last couple of months back. It was Education from a Deep and Multidisciplinary Perspective, enhanced by relating to social emotional learning. Just 1 second. So based on mindfulness, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence. So there are a number of large number of research I've linked on this publication, and then my main approach was to integrate a number of different perspectives, essentially from the areas of educational neuroscience and neuroscience of learning. Okay, so the title meaningful assessment and evaluation with lasting value and systems perspective. So I highlight 3 points that are meaningful. So I'm trying to make assessment and evaluation more meaningful. And then second one, lasting value. So how can we make our assessment have a lasting value? So anyone who is interested in these assessment grades or marks, or even the learners, students, how can they have a lasting value? And third aspect is systems perspective. So it's not just we award a grade and or mark, and then that has, okay, at the end of the semester, okay, they go, learners go away with this mark or the grade, and that's it. I'm trying to put forth this idea of it has, it's connected to so many other things. So to start with, the meaningful, what I mean by meaningful assessment, I'm going on to my second slide here. I'm trying to make it more meaningful by going with this definition I got from a book I read 2 years ago, published 2 years ago by Marilee Breziani-Ludwig. She's actually a professor of post-secondary educational leadership and co-director for the Center of Education, Innovation and Leadership from San Diego State University. So in the book, she wrote that the title was actually Neuroscience of Learning and Development, Enhanced Creativity, Compassion, and it goes on like that, thinking, critical thinking, peace in higher education. So the definition, this is like holistic definition for learning and development. It's not just for learning, and development part is essential there. So the definition, I really like this definition. I mean, as a holistic definition to learning and education and development. So the definition goes like this: the commodity of higher education is not the course by course credits accumulated degree. The commodity of higher education is the human process of learning and development that can be measured through direct evidence gathered in reflective learning portfolios. So, okay, and then they have divided this definition into 3 areas. So learning and development is combining into these 3 areas. So one notable difference in ordinary definition of what's learning is, development aspect. It's not that cognitive aspect, so development aspect. That's social and emotional aspects that ingrained in that definition. That's what I like in this holistic definition. So 3 areas they highlighted: the knowledge gained from research, course learning, and book learning. So we tend to highlight course learning. Typically what we do is, or we present some material, they study for 12 weeks or so, and then they go away with this course learning. And then we do assessment for course learning. And then some students might engage in other additional reading, book learning, and then from other research as well. Okay, so the main highlight in our current practices is course learning. Okay. But in this broad definition, they are highlighting 2 more areas. That's what I'm trying to highlight here. The second one here being the wisdom gained from intuition, sensing, and mindful experiencing of emotions. So, okay, so this is a challenge here. How can we assess these aspects, B and C? The B here, wisdom gained from intuition. So what they have internalized from what they have gathered. So that's important. How can we assess? It can be difficult. And mindful experiencing of emotions. How would they emotionally engage in the content? Right? It's probably difficult, right? We'll suggest some ways of doing that. And so I'm opening up this discussion. There could be many other ways to assess that. And here in this definition from Marilee, they have highlighted. So one clear way of assessing this is learning portfolios. Right, and then third aspect here, the ability to embrace the unknown, the curious, and inquire into that we cannot see yet. So we are preparing them for the future. So we are not preparing for them for the past or what is there now. How can we make them curious and continue their learning? And this is the idea of lifelong learning is ubiquitous. The learners, when they go out, they have to be ready for continue their learning, and they have to be curious. They have to find ways of improving their knowledge and development aspect. So how can we, especially B and C, how can we get these aspects assessed from our assessment. So that could be challenging. We are suggesting some in the next a couple of slides. Okay, then going back to this lasting value and systems perspective. Okay, I like to bring out another quote from this book, The Power of Mindful Learning. This is probably the second edition, 2016. Initial version was published by Ellen Langer, professor of psychology from Harvard University. I mean, the first version was published, I think, about 20 years ago, and then this is the second edition, 2016. So I like this particular statement from this book. I mean, based on her research, and it's a very critical statement if you look at it. It goes like this. So I'm trying to bring out the systems perspective and lasting value of this assessment, right? So schools generally pay little attention to how, when, and by whom the criteria for grading were chosen. If the criteria were questioned and varied, students' position on the continuum might change, but they are evaluated. To make matters worse, once we are placed on the tail end of the distribution, social aspects work to keep on us there, setting us up for a lifetime of success or failure. Our fate as winners, losers, or just average is sealed. So this is a very critical statement coming from an eminent scholar. So this gives an indication. So the assessment would matter more than what we think. For example, a student might get a high distinction or just an ordinary pass. So what goes into this learner's head? I mean, high distinction learners, I mean, the negative side would be, okay, they might think, oh, we don't have anything else to learn. We have mastered the unit. And the lower end, P, they might think, okay, oh, I'm really bad at this. And maybe it's mathematics, maybe it's something else, maybe biology. So they might think, oh, I'm really bad. This is not for me. And they keep away from that assessment. So, I mean, what I'm trying to get here is we have to be serious in avoiding these grades and all that. And they will have, I mean, social pressures is one aspect, but what goes into the learner's head, they might shut them down. I mean, shut off from learning further. They are not prepared to engage in that particular unit anymore, because that particular disciplinary area, because they couldn't do well. I mean, is the assessment just situational, or is it something built into them? Like, or it's just situational matter, environmental matter? Who knows? I mean, these are the things what I'm trying to get here. So this assessment will have, I mean, systems perspective. I mean, they have more than what we think connected to so many other systems. So they might go to their employees and they might offer them a job based on that grade. So, and they will have lasting value for that individual learner and people who are getting access. That's what I'm trying to highlight here in this presentation. Okay, the next slide here, I'm highlighting through main or popular models of learning, Bloom's taxonomy and Kolb's experiential learning. And Bloom's taxonomy, we have this high end towards the tip of this triangle, high end, and the other end, lower end. So we broadly accept that, okay, especially in higher education, learning has to be, I mean, learning and assessment has to be higher end, like creating, evaluating, and probably analysis, right? Not targeted towards the lower end, remembering, just mere understanding. And so when we compare that with Kolb's experiential learning, yeah, most importantly, so the complete learning will take place when you complete the whole 4 stages. Concrete experience. 10
minutes, Chadana.
Yeah, thank you. Concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, active experimentation. So the complete learning has to take place when we complete all 4 stages. But essentially, abstract conceptualization, that probably you can draw links to creating, evaluating from Bloom's taxonomy. So to highlight this with a simple example, like adding, the notion of adding. So we can ask students to, okay, what is 2 plus 2? Okay, give me the answer. That's probably we are highlighting the lower end here. And then we can be broad, or like towards higher order learning, we can reframe the question to what is adding? Ask the students, okay, what is adding? Or we can go further. What do you understand by adding, or notion of adding? How do you differentiate between adding and subtracting? Okay, now if you look at these questions, which one are we creating lasting impact on the learner in terms of engagement? So 2 plus 2, you can mechanically do that, like a 2 plus 2. They might have practiced few times adding, okay, they go it. Also 2 plus 2, okay, the number can be 5-digit number, computers and all these machines can do it very quickly, in a fraction of a second. So this is a time we are talking about artificial intelligence and automation and things like that. So these type of questions will be handled, it's already handling, and in future more and more of these type routine answers can be easily handled by machines. So should we be training our students, learners on these areas, or higher order ones, like what is adding, more complex. So time required would be more for what is adding. Learn engagement, the time spent on the answering these questions would be more, right? And it would create lasting learning experience. So yeah, so
that's 12 minutes, Chadana, yeah. 12 minutes.
Thank you. So we should be highlighting high order learning. That's one message. And then another important thing I'm highlighting here is generic competencies. Okay, we might have mathematics, biology, and some areas, but how about in assessment? Can we target on these ones? Critical thinking abilities. Okay, creative thinking, systems thinking, growth mindsets, how willing they are to move forward with further learning, growth mindset, and how open are they to new ideas? How then introspection, self-awareness, reflection, that kind of thing. So these common ones, doesn't matter which area they study, how can we incorporate into our assessment these aspects? Can we give at the end of the semester, okay, critical thinking, or this student has really good critical thinking, creative thinking ability. These will have lasting impact. They will carry on throughout their life, right? And the next one I highlight, recognition test or open-ended conceptual questions. As we have seen, open-ended conceptual questions, what is adding as opposed to routine 2 plus 2, which were the ones we call veridical decision making, routine, precise, adaptive decision making. So learners can give more creative answers. Like what is adding? There's no one solution to that. Every individual gives unique, authentic answers, what they understand. There could be many right answers. There's no one that we are keeping away from conformity. We are encouraging creativity from the learners. 2 plus 2, there's only one answer. 100 students will give the same answer of 4. No creativity. We are conforming to one answer. We are encouraging conformity there. So
1 minute to go, Chadana. 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. And so one thing, open-ended conceptual question, we need to give them adequate time to answer. Routine answers, we can quickly do that. 100 questions, 100 answers we can done in. So these generic competencies, if you are testing them using open-ended conceptual, you need to allocate adequate time. Okay, and implicit memories, they might carry implicit memories. They will be, they are given more time to bring out what is hidden there, unconscious memories into your answers. So, okay, that's these are the references, and then thank you, questions.
Thank you very much, Chadana. That was really thought-provoking. I actually wrote down the name of that book, The Power of Mindful Learning. I might look that up myself. I'll open it up to questions and see if anyone is interested, got any questions, want to ask any questions. What particularly resonated with me was the way that you have introduced the human into systems thinking to design a system, assessment that will measure wisdom. Have you done that in your classes? Have you tried to implement this in your assessment?
Yes, and actually in my delivery, currently I'm doing mostly delivery, and then I'm trying to incorporate these ideas as much as I can. I have given how I have done in my book, and I'm suggested, like I present my delivery, I deliver content as a series of questions. There's one thing I do, like I don't give a statement. I present my content I want to present as a series of questions. So I try to get their attention, and then I try to first understand what they understand about that. I mean, I might be introducing a totally new concept, but they might have some ideas about this notion, not directly related, but in day-to-day life experiences. So I might be teaching them computer networks, but they might have some ideas about road networks. We all go on road networks. There's some relationship, and the network means there are nodes, there are links. So, okay, whether it's a computer network, whether it's a road network, the same thing. I mean, like at a highest level. So I'm trying to I might introduce them to a computer network by getting from them what is a network. I mean, what sort of understanding you have, and then I try to link that to a computer network. So I ask them series of questions until they get an understanding, and then I try to get from them what they have internalized when they come to the class, and then they can link that knowledge to what we introduced today. So that sort of thing we do practice, and yeah, I have been doing this for a number of years, 10, 15. More than that, probably.
And what do the students think of that, Chadana? Do they give you positive feedback?
I haven't in the past few years. I mean, like when I talk to them, I see that, okay, they get engaged. I mean, by at least trying to give some answers, the engagement, I can see that happening. But formally, I haven't got this student feedback, because usually the unit evaluations, I haven't been getting this. I mean, like the method, the teacher's method evaluation as such. Yeah, but we have.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see whether or not the students recognise the difference in the approach. I'd just be interested just to know that myself. But thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? I can see Paul's posted a comment there: teaching for employability versus teaching for employment. Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much, Chadana. We'll keep moving, but if anyone has any questions, can you please put it into the chat, hold your questions, and we'll come back at the end of the session if we have time. Can I ask everyone to show their appreciation to Chadana, please? Thank you very much. All right, if you could stop sharing your screen, Chadana, we'll jump straight into the next presentation, which is yours, Samer. Samer is going to talk about how to make individual traditional assessments more effective to combat contract cheating.
Thank you, Celeste. Good morning, everyone. Okay, I'm going to share my experience with contract cheating over the last 2 years. When I joined CQUniversity, I got 1 unit, and at the end of the term, I was horrified when I saw all the assessment tasks have been advertised in many contract cheating websites, and it was a very astonishing experience. And I started to look at literature and how can we go about contract cheating and what are the good practices in this regard. And I tried to accommodate certain proposals. I continued to improve some practices, and I ended up with a model that I wanted to share with you today. So, but this presentation, as yesterday, it is a bit interactive. So if you don't mind, if you can go to your phone or you open a new tab in your browser and try to go to menti.com. I'll just give you the instructions here. You go to menti.com, and then you can use a code 546678, and then you'll be able to connect to the slides, and you can see at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a thumb up button, so you can just click on it to show that you have already connected. I got 2 questions, one at the beginning and one at the end. I will start with asking you a question about your experience with contract cheating, and then we ended up trying to evaluate the practice that I have adopted and see your opinion about it. So let's see. So now we have 3 connected. We got 33 in the room, so it's a good number actually. We can get a couple more, and this is the first question. Again, the code 546678. So I got the first question for you. So what's your experience with the student engaging in contract cheating as an educator? Is it always or most often the case in your units, or sometimes, rarely, or never? it's good to see that you are very fortunate actually that you don't have contract cheating, most of you, which is great. But like it depends on the assessment task that you have in the discipline. So in our experience, it was quite overwhelming experience where students are required to do summative tasks and they end up with being exposed to contract cheating activities. And that was quite overwhelming to us as educators. But contract cheating is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many problems associated with our way of approaching assessment tasks. So, when we have an assessment task that is actually, maybe has more weight than other formative tasks, you will find students having lack of confidence that they can actually get good marks. And if the assessment is not personalized enough, if it is not engaging enough, students will not be stimulated and they will be more prone to contract cheating activities. And one problem that we face with students is that they always miss the boat when they get feedback at the end of the term and there is no hope for them to go back and correct their assignments. And that doesn't actually help them attain the learning outcomes at the end of the day, which make all of them more vulnerable to contract cheating activities. So I thought about that a lot, and I have consulted literature, and I came up with a model that can address this problem. So mainly I'm talking about any assessment task that you have, which is like a main assessment. You can break it down into subtasks. And then you need to embed self and peer assessment to make it more authentic and personalized to all students and try to maximize the attainment of learning outcomes. And you should have a graded assessment regime where both assessment tasks should be graded. So it's not only the case that you ask students to peer evaluate others, but you should also grade that. And then you should give time between the first assessment and final assessment so students can actually accommodate the feedback that they receive during the self and peer assessment. And you need to grade whether or not they have incorporated the feedback that they got. To show you how I have done that in our example, so I got a research and project management unit for Master of Project Management students at CQUniversity, and the unit the assessment itself is personalized and authentic. It should be, where you ask them to come up with a unique research proposal. Everyone has his own topic, and they work on certain projects related to project management discipline. So we give them certain topics and we ask them to generate research questions. So everyone will end up with a very unique research question that they have to address in their research proposal. And what I have done, so if the assessment task is 100%, so I split that into two tasks. One is the draft proposal, and you can say 30% of the weight. And one is the final proposal. And you can play with the weighting depending on your unit. And you need to allow time between the first one and the last one. So you got week 9 and week 12. So within week 10, for example, they will be able to get some feedback and try to reflect on that and improve their final proposal. And with the draft proposal part, you ask students to submit that into an automated process for self and peer assessment. And if you use Moodle, I think you are fortunate because it has a great plugin called Workshop that I will show you in a minute. And so what does that do when you do self and peer assessment? So students will receive 2 grades, one for the quality of the submissions as graded in the self and peer assessment, and one for the quality of grading itself. So you also grade your peer, but your grading itself will be marked, whether or not it was good enough and it actually compares with others who have also evaluated that student. So once students got that, every single student will end up with a lot of feedback from the self-assessment, from the peer assessment, and you could possibly ask the tutors if you have time and commercial aspects are being considered. It does allow you to consider marking by tutors. You can add that as well and get students to have more informative and valuable feedback from their faculty. So once you are done with that, students will be required to incorporate all these comments in the final proposal. And you need to allow something for compliance statement where students will show you all the feedback that they received and how they have actually incorporated that feedback into their final assessment. And that will actually deter many students from, they possibly purchase the draft assessment, but they will be required to do a lot of work in class for self and peer assessment in the first place, and then they have to incorporate the comments. and that will make it more difficult for them to go back to the contract cheating websites and try to accommodate their needs as well. And then you allow the final mark for the quality of the final report that students have done. The tricky part is how to use technology with regard to self and peer assessment, and there is plenty of tools available in different universities. At CQUniversity, we use Moodle as an LMS system, and in that one we have something called a workshop plugin. And it's a very handy and easy user-friendly tool that I have used over the last 2 years, and it was quite effective. And it doesn't engage you a lot and doesn't consume a lot of time and effort from you as a coordinator. And what you can do, you can just use the plugin, and this is the way how you configure it, where you got 5 stages. The first one is setup phase, where you put exactly what you are asking students to do and the instructions for submissions, and you put some rubric for students to use for their evaluation. And you may also give them an example submission, like what quality we are looking for. You can give them like HD example, or maybe a past example. But I usually don't like to do that, because students will actually go and follow the HD one and try to manipulate their assessment accordingly. So I didn't feel that the example would be beneficial for students, especially postgraduates. So once you're done with that, you start asking students, you move to the next stage, which is the submission phase, where students you allocate them, and when you allocate randomly, and it will be anonymous, completely anonymous, and this may all help you, Christina, with regard to dyslexia issue. And all students will not be exposed to others with regard to names, because it will be completely anonymous. Their names will be removed from the assessment tasks, and they will be asked not to mention their names or anything that would identify them to peers or maybe faculty, it depends actually on what you are trying to do. And once you are done with that, so students will start to make submissions, and then you go to the next assessment, or the next phase, which is the assessment, where students will start to self and peer assess others. So everyone will get 1 or 2 assessments depending on the way that you put, and they have to do that in class. And that would be quite useful and effective to deter students from engaging contract cheating agencies. And then once you get all of that done, you go to the last one, which is fully automated, and you grade students. So the quality is mainly, every student will get 2 grades. One for the quality of the submission, which is the average of what they have got.
That's 10 minutes, Samer.
Yeah, I'm almost done. And one is the quality of their grading, and the way how it is comparing, it is looking at the majority of those who have actually given the grade, and compares to others who have give less grades. So if you have 3 people who have actually graded 9, 9, and 7, so those who were very close to 9 will get full mark actually for grading, because it is unanimously agreed that this could be the high quality thing. And then you close it with certain remarks, and this is how I have incorporated that in one of the units, PPMP 20015 at CQUniversity, and then you provide conclusive remarks, reflection of what you have seen with the students, and this is the way how you get the marks. You get 1 mark for the submission and 1 mark for the assessment, and it was quite effective. So we tested that over 2 years, and the feedback that I got from students on their learning experience. So I just give you a few seconds to read through that. And the feedback was, we asked them about the feedback, whether it was effective or not, and you can see the vast majority were saying that we strongly agree that the feedback has helped us to learn, which was quite pleasing to see. And I like the way that draft assignment has really helped them, because they have the opportunity to correct their mistakes before it is too late. So they don't miss the boat, and they feel that they are more confident and they are up to it, and definitely they will be less prone to contract cheating activities. So this regime may not actually address contract cheating completely, because still students can go to contract cheating websites and get some help, but it can actually deter them, because it will be more stimulating and engaging experience, and more students will feel that they can do the work.
That's 12 minutes.
Yes. So if you go back to your phone, and this is the proposal that I have come up with, this is my experience in the last 2 years. What do you think about this proposal? if you go back to your phone again, this is a code, and you will find a scaling question, Likert scale, 1 to 7. What do you think about the proposal? Does it really help stimulate engaged students? Will that deter vulnerability, contact cheating? Will that enhance attainment of learning outcomes? And whether or not you will be considering this approach in your unit. It would be great to have your opinion on this. And I'm done with that. Celeste, so over to you.
Thanks very much, Samer. While everyone is completing the final Menti rating, if you've got any questions, please either raise your hand or type it into the group chat. Samer, it's probably the length of the presentation. It's not quite long enough to delve into the detail of the assessment type that you've got there. But one of the questions that I had was just in relation to assessing the quality of the peer feedback. Now, you've done that quantitatively, but do you do that qualitatively? Like, is there, like, how do you assess the feedback that the peers are giving, even if it's consistent in numbers? How do you assess the moderation? Thanks, Vicky. That's the question I've got. The moderation of the marks. How do you confirm that?
This is a very excellent question. So we have left a mark in the entity profile that all grading will be randomly moderated by the tutors. So if we have very large classes, it's so difficult to go and assess every grading that students have done. So we have said that randomly we're going to select a batch of students who have done the grading and look at the constructive comments that they have given. So this is a qualitative approach that we have used. So we told students that the grade that you have given, if it is not informative and the feedback that you give to others is not constructive and valuable enough, you may get a decrease in your mark. And that's something that you can do in your unit when you ask students, but you should tell students in the first place that their feedback will be moderated and their mark will be affected if they are found not to give constructive feedback. And that's why we ask tutors sometimes to go and give feedback as well, because we need that to be enriching experience to everyone. Because high achieving students have complained that they didn't get very valuable experience from low achievers. And that's why I was actually forced to ask my tutors to look at the reports and try to give some feedback as well.
And Vicky's actually expanded on that question. She's asking, how do you teach how to do the self-and peer assessment during the course? Do you show the students how to do the peer part of it?
Definitely. So at the beginning of the term, we tell them that this is an assessment task and we train them on how to do that. Sometimes we give them an example from a different discipline just to show them how to use the rubric and how to start the assessment. We try to encourage them by showing them the value of doing self and peer assessment based on the literature that we have seen and how that would make them more stimulated and attaining of learning outcomes. So we should actually train tutors as well as students, and we can do that in tutorial classes. You don't need to do that in the lectures, because I use that in my unit in the computer lab. So if you don't have computer labs, you can ask students to bring their own devices, and you go from there. So yeah, I think it is a success factor that you need to train students before you introduce that workshop to them.
Thanks very much, Samer. I can see that Ali, you have your mic open. Did you have a question?
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. I thought you might have been ready to ask the question. Okay, thanks, Samer. We will we'll stop it there. If we do have a chance to come back at the end of the session, if we've got time, we'll come back if people have got any other questions. But can I ask everyone to show their appreciation to Samer, please? Thank you very much, Samer. We'll jump straight into the next presentation, which is Sim-MAPP. And this is Leeanne Heaton, a framework for simulation design in pre-registration nursing curricula. So I'll wait for Samer to stop sharing, and then Leeanne, if you've got a presentation, you'll have the opportunity to open your PowerPoint.
Thanks, Celeste. Okay, so my conversation today is really about a framework for simulation design, because what we've tended to do a lot in the past is simulation is used a lot in nursing and other types of healthcare education. And what's normally happened is that it's just been tagged on or bolted on as something that we've done to try and help students learn. And so this stems from my PhD, which I've recently completed. And it's really about trying to find a way of fitting simulation into the curriculum without it being a bolt-on type of situation. So looking at ways we can add it as part of the curriculum. So at the moment, there's not really a known principle, framework or scaffold about how or why a particular simulation strategy is used at a particular point in time. It's often related to a staff member having a tendency to want to use that type of simulation modality. So I did some interviews with nurse educators and also with students to find out what their thoughts were about simulation and their experiences of using simulation or being involved in simulation in pre-registration nursing education. And so this results in the information that I'm sharing today. So the 6 key concepts that came out of the interviews were about the milieu or the environment that the students or the participants are involved in and how that feels for them. It's also about the approach, and that means the type of modality that they might use. That might be whether it's a part-task trainer, a simulated patient, could be a human patient simulator, and the type of activity that they might be doing in simulation. So whether it's a one-on-one type of situation or it's a fully immersive situation where there's no educator involved in the actual situation. It's also about the physical. So that's not just about the physical requirements, but it's about, you know, the preparation that's involved. So the participant, how well prepared for this particular situation are the participants? Do they know what the expectations are, what the guidelines are, and you know, are they really connected with what they're meant to be doing? The second P in that map is the psychological, and that psychological is about them being able to really understand what's expected of them, and also that the educators are not expecting too much of them. You know, the preparation that they've had really has a lot to do with that, but it's also the feelings that they might have on the day, the attitude that they might have about being involved in the simulation, the support that they feel, and, you know, the respect from their peers and the situation. Those kind of things really have an impact. Then when we, one of the main things that came up was pedagogy, and pedagogy is really the art and science of education. So what we found was that many of the people involved in simulation had not been really educated on how to use it. So there were a lot of people trying to participate in simulation where they were casual staff members who'd never had an opportunity to really have that teaching or learning around it. And so because of that, that really did impact on the students' learning in that particular area. Also, because there was not necessarily design, people were finding that they were not really able to understand what they were meant to be doing, and they weren't understanding what students were supposed to.
Hang on, Leanne. Sorry to interrupt. Tanya, your mic is open. Can you? Thank you so much. Sorry, Leanne.
That's okay. So about, you know, just how they were learning in that particular environment. The next part was about the fidelity, and that's really about the authenticity or realism of a situation for a student or a participant. And so there's a lot of thought about fidelity being, they talk about low and high fidelity, and often they're talking about technology. A lot of the people that we were looking at talked more about technology than realising that fidelity was about the realism of the situation. So with fidelity in this particular study, that we found that it was an outcome of a combination of the factors, which were the milieu, the approach, the physical and psychological. And the variation or combination of these can impact on the outcome of the overall fidelity. So you see on that diagram that the simulation pedagogy is really like a continuum, where you've got the psychological or the psychomotor skills, where you teach a student to, say, inject an orange, and the student learns the technique, the psychomotor skill of learning how to inject an orange. Whereas as you go up the continuum to the more immersive student-led, they'll be in an immersive situation where they're expected to inject a medication as part of the scenario. So there's a lot more complexity around that situation, and they're not being instructed on how to do that specific psychomotor skill. So all of those factors, the milieu, the approach, the physical and the psychological, can vary in what's happening with the particular participant, and therefore that will have an impact on the overall fidelity, which is the broken line on the outside. So when we go to the next slide, it's just a little bit of we've made a Sim-MAPP that is really put together by an axis map, an XY axis graph. And so to be able to get to this, we used the matrix of those factors, which were the modality, the milieu, the approach, the physical and the psychological. And we gave them scores on whether they were excellent down to absent. And that way we were able to plot on a graph, and I'll just go to that graph. So you can see here the X, so they're the X's, and you'll see where they've been plotted on the line here for the overall, whether it was behaviourist or immersive. And then just going back, the second lot of matrix, part of the matrix, was quality indicators that came about from a study that was done back in 2010 and was reported on in 2013. It was done by Arthur Levitt-Jones and Cable, and it was about quality indicators in using simulation in education. And it was a Delphi study. It was done time and time again to get to the results of the principles there of the 6 categories were the physical resources, which we've already included as something that came up in my study, mannequin fidelity level, and that's where they're only talking about mannequin, information and communication technology, staff resources and training, teaching and learning approaches, curriculum integration and pedagogical principles. So they were all kind of part of what was coming out of my study as well. So they were put together as part of the Y of the axis graph, which comes back to here. And I've got those marked out because I've a particular learning example that I used. So the particular study or the particular example that I used here was if at the commencement of a pre-registration nursing course where students are learning only the fundamental nursing skills and to learn the principle of washing hands and removal of suture or staples, the learner should ideally have had some theoretical background. And this is one of the issues that many times students are going into a simulation and they haven't had that theoretical background beforehand. It's also about them understanding what's expected of them when they go into the situation. So, you know, we need them to have the adequate preparation for what they're going to be doing. So they'd need a background in infection control, aseptic non-touch technique, and that's just essential before they go in.
That's 10 minutes, Leanne.
Thank you. Immediately prior to the activity, the students or the participants would have to undergo a pre-brief that provided them with an orientation to the environment, the equipment, and they also need to be reminded of the learning objectives, because that's one of the other issues that often happens, that, you know, educators can get so caught up with what they're trying to achieve with the simulation activity, they lose sight of what the learning objectives really were. So, you know, they need to be reminded about confidentiality and all the other expected guidelines or behaviours that are expected in that space. The learner then has, you know, needs access to the resources to support their learning around hand washing. And I've used something really basic because we constantly get feedback about how poor hand washing is for students when they're out on placement. So while they know this, they don't seem to be able to put it in place. So we're really trying to get them to get their mindset in this simulated environment first before they go out on placement. So there's an expectation the learners have the skills demonstrated to them by a tutor prior to them practicing, and then they get to practice on, you know, with those psychomotor skills. So that just goes through this slide here, just talks about the expectations around preparation and also undergoing the actual session and then having a debrief afterwards. So to be prepared for that, we went through those these factors, the X and the Y factors for the mapping, and then we come up with what score that would come up with for each of the sections.
That's 12 minutes.
Thank you. And so, as you can see, it varies from point to point depending on how that's scored. And if we go back, you can see that this is how they're scored. So, for example, with the MILU, the evidence of replication environment, whether it's excellent down to absent, any of these things can actually impact on what overall fidelity that will add to. So that then goes onto this map and is actually plotted on the graph. And then, as you can see, it ends up being either behaviourist high, immersive high, or behaviourist low, immersive low. And so what we actually have there is a behaviourist medium because of the way that the scoring's over in this corner. And so because it comes up in that score, we kind of know where that sits and we can scaffold the simulation as we go through. So the Sim-MAPP will afford educators an opportunity to see how, when and where a simulation activity can be integrated and enhance the learning in pre-registration nursing programs. And it can be used, this tool can be used as a framework for design and integration of simulation-based education, a framework to audit and evaluate simulation activities, a framework to appraise fidelity in simulation activities, an audit tool for peer assessment. And while it's yet to be tested formally, it's actually an important contribution to understanding simulation pedagogy and provides a tool which can be used to map for fidelity, design, and inform the implementation of immersive simulation. And it also extends on the work of others before. So hopefully that will make it a little bit easier for our staff to be able to integrate it into the curriculum rather than just having bolt-on sessions. That's all for me. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Leeanne. I will ask if anyone has any questions. If you'd like to raise your hand or post to the chat, please. I thought that was great, Leeanne, really informative and a very, I don't know, almost like a fundamental way of thinking about doing assessment. But one of the things that did strike me when I was listening to you is how hard is it to teach the academic to assess in that way? And how is that received by the student?
So in this particular, even though assessment can be considered, it's not necessarily just talking about assessment, it's talking about implementing simulation as a strategy to help learning in an undergraduate program. And often we have staff who have just come in, they may have some knowledge from other sources and unfortunately don't really understand it as a holistic way of looking at how the student learns throughout. So what we're trying to do is ensure that students come into the program and the simulation is scaffolded throughout, because if we make a situation too high fidelity to start with, the learner can actually get lost and not really understand what's meant to be happening and can be scared to go into that environment. So what we're trying to do is make it a bit more realistic and part of what they do throughout the curriculum rather than something that's scary for them.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? A quick question for Leeanne, otherwise we're going to cut into the lunch break. All right, so there's no questions, Leeanne, but please hang around just in case someone posts something. Can I ask everyone to show their appreciation to Leeanne, please? Thank you very much. And we'll jump without any delay straight into the final presentation with Tanya Rutherford, peer-to-peer and examination of student mentorship on online learning.
Hi, it's Karina Menzies-Valentine here.
Hi, Karina. I can definitely hear you now.
Excellent, thank you. My colleagues have nominated me to do the talking, but you will note that both Tanya Rutherford and Melinda Mann are also online and available to answer your questions. Our presentation is based on a study that was the brainchild of Tanya. As many of you may know, Tanya runs the student mentorship program here at CQUniversity, and I've been involved, as Melinda has, with Tanya through the student leadership program, at which stage we have the mentor awards. And through that, there is significant anecdotal evidence about the support that this type of peer mentorship provides. But it was surprising to us when we started looking at the literature that there isn't actually a lot of academic studies done on the benefits of peer mentoring. The ones that are done tend to be in school contexts rather than tertiary contexts. The other thing we found with the literature is that there were definitely benefits in regard to self-regulated learning programs where there are mentors involved. But again, there seemed to be a lack of studies relating to peer mentorship for online contexts. So we decided to bring those factors together to have a look at what sort of impact does peer mentoring have when students are undertaking an online learning program. We recruited students from CQU itself, and we actually endeavoured to get a good cross-section of students from all schools. The only school we excluded was the Access Education School, because we felt that they were doing a lot of the study skills type of work that was involved in the learning program, so we felt that might skew the data. But all other schools were involved. All students who were recruited through the email broadcast had completed at least one term of study. So we had an indication of where they were sitting with their studies, and they had had exposure to at least one term of university life and academic study in this tertiary setting. Using those parameters, we ended up with 21 volunteers, 10 of which we allocated to the mentor group and 11 to a control group. All of the students, all 21 volunteers, undertook a study skills or academic learning program called Learn to Learn that Tanya herself has developed in her spare time. I don't know when the woman sleeps. And we decided that was a good program to use because it was not related to the university itself. It was a separate program, and it was not related to the specific disciplines that the students were involved with their studies. The program is a 6-week program, which is totally online. The mentor group had the addition of a once a week Zoom session. Now, again, we went for a Zoom session to keep it in this online format. And that was with one of the trained CQU student mentors. So he met with them once a week, he talked about the program with them, and he talked about any challenges that they were facing with the program. The control group, in contrast, completed the Learn to Learn program completely independently. To give ourselves some base data, we got the students to undertake an online survey prior to their commencement of the program, which consisted of 27 statements. Now, those 27 statements related to 3 themes: study skills, self-efficacy, and academic challenges. And I'll put a couple of examples up there of the types of statements that were written. Things like, no matter what I do, I seem to be cramming at the last minute, or I believe I can successfully complete my studies, or about their sense of belonging to the university. So we gain that base data by getting them to rate each of those statements from 0 to 10, with 10 is not typical of me at all, through to 10 being very typical of me. We then got them to undertake the survey again immediately after completion of the program. Now, with the caveat that this is our results so far, because this is very much a work in progress. We have so far only done the pre and post survey. We will be undertaking the survey again at the end of the term after the exam period, and then we are going to further this with getting some qualitative data from focus groups. But so just looking at what we have found so far, we decided to have a look at only those students, or the data from those students, who completed at least 50% of the Learn to Learn program. This gave us 4 people in the mentor group and 5 people in the control group. We chose that figure of at least 50%, but most of the ones who were results we were looking at had completed at least 70, some of them 80, 90 or 100% of the program. Our decision to do this was so that we felt those students would have had the maximum possible benefits from being involved in the program. From this initial data, there was an obvious positive shift between the statements in the first survey and the statements at the end of the survey. What was interesting for our study is that there was a consistently higher shift for those students who had been part of the mentor group compared to the control group. So when I'm talking about that positive shift, they are now rating themselves higher on that scale of 1 to 10 in a positive fashion. So for academic challenges, you can see there the mentor group on average went up 10%, for self-efficacy 18%, and for study skills 17%, compared to the 4, 5 and 4% that the control group went up. There were some interesting negative shifts that occurred for specific questions. There was 1 or 2 questions that all got a negative shift, and we're really interested to explore that more in the focus groups. We wonder if that has, because students now have more self-awareness as a result of doing the program, and therefore a better understanding of the question and a better understanding of where they sit on that question. That's one of the things they're positing, but we're going to explore that more. The other thing that happened was there was 1 or 2 individuals who also had a negative shift. And again, we're interested in exploring that more. Not surprisingly, the 1 student who completed 100% of the Learn to Learn program and attended all 7 of the mentor sessions showed the highest positive shift in all 3 of the themes. So you can see there 24%, which is a huge shift, 24% in terms of understanding and embracing those academic challenges. Study strategies, 34%, and the self-efficacy had gone up by over 1/3, as you can see there. Now I'm barreling through this a bit because I do want to allow the opportunity for questions so that Tanya and Melinda can join the conversation. As I mentioned, we don't as yet have our focus group data, but we just wanted to share with you a couple of comments that have come out of unsolicited emails. They have, of course, been de-identified, but we do have ethical clearance to use comments made by the students throughout the process. As you can see, an extreme situation happening, as often happens for our CQU students. We know that a big part of our attrition rate is because, not because they don't enjoy their academic studies or struggling in that regard, but because there is stuff going on in their personal life. So for us, it was really interesting from a retention point of view that being involved in the Learn to Learn program actually gave this person confidence, not only in their study skills, but in their personal life as well. The second comment we selected to share with you was because this concept of being awarded a supplementary exam, to use the person's words, broke me. That feeling of failure, they didn't even fail the whole subject. They went on to, we checked the results and they went on to pass the subject.
That's 10 minutes, Karina.
Thank you. But this feeling that they thought they would just get in, it would be like school, it would be easy, and it broke this person to get a supplementary exam. So being part of it for them has been implemented with their study regime, but it also gave her that mental health capacity to stop and reflect. Where to from here? We're going to be doing that third survey and into the focus groups to try and find out some of the whys, why they signed up, why they dropped out, and why the positive and negative shifts. It certainly appears from our quantitative data that there is an impact, both in terms of the Learn to Learn program and the mentor assistance to complete that program, but clearly we need to investigate further. I'll stop there, but I do want to open for questions, and Tanya and Melinda are both present if anybody would like to ask anything.
Thanks very much, Karina. We have had a couple of questions in the chat. Vicky wants to know if you recorded the Zoom sessions for students to access in the mentor group, for example, for those who couldn't attend, and also what percentage of students were able to attend.
Tanya, have you got those figures?
So we didn't record the Zoom sessions because we were focusing on the impact of actually engaging with the mentor as opposed to it just being a recording. And in response to the number of students who were able to attend, I don't have the details with me here. I know we had one person who came to all 7. I think we had one come to 6, 1 or 2 come to 5, and then we had 10 all up who were allocated to the mentor program, and I think there was only one person who didn't attend at all. Everyone else attended 1 or more sessions.
Thanks very much, Tanya. And I have to comment, how awesome that you can do your presentation from the car. I just hope you're not driving, but that's pretty cool.
No, I'm not. I am not.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions for Karina, Tanya, or Melinda? Well, I think you guys are getting off easy. I think it's fabulous. What are the plans for rolling it out more widely?
Well, as I say, we want to, for this pilot itself, we want to look at data around the mentor group, but also around the Learn to Learn program and feedback about that. Because as I say, we are fortunate to actually have the inventor and writer of the program as part of the team. So in terms of rolling it out, there are to us 2 elements. One is the mentorship, but the other is the program itself. Tanya, you might like to say further.
Well, at this stage, it's really, I think, for us being able to share the impact so we can then have conversations about how do we look at rolling it out. Is it a small group thing? Is it a bigger thing? Do we target particular students that we know are going to be higher need? And they're conversations that we want to have. We've just been trying to focus on making sure that it is actually a conversation that is worth having, which I think we've found that it is. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at the moment, and just mindful of, you know, funding and when different funding rounds are coming through and stuff like that.
All right, thank you very much. If there's no other questions, can I just ask that everybody show their appreciation to Karina, Tanya and Melinda. So thank you very much. That was a really great presentation. Much appreciated. If anyone does have any other questions, there's still time to type it into the chat or to raise your hand or even to jump in. But otherwise, we're all good. If there's no other questions I'll now open it if there's anyone who would like to ask questions of any of our presenters from today's session. Okay, so does anyone have any questions in general from any of our presenters? All right, so I'll take that as a no. So can I now just one final thank you to all of our presenters, really much appreciated. That was a really fabulous session. I really enjoyed that. I took away some learning myself, so I might just put that in practice. So thank you all very much, everybody, and I'll see you in one of the later sessions this afternoon.